Penguin Random House Audio presents A Traveler at the Gates of Wisdom by John Boyne. Read for you by Tim Mcinnerny.
For my brother, Paul. Author's note. Country names in the chapter titles refer to their current designations in 2020. All other geographical names, cities, towns, villages, are as they were at the time of the story or at their earliest known historical designations. Part 1. A Traveller in the Darkness. Palestine, AD 1. On the night that I was born, my father, Marinus, left our home while my mother was in labour, and over the 8 hours that followed, slaughtered a dozen infant boys, the sons of our neighbours and friends, each one under the age of 2 years. He owned 4 swords, including a pair of gladii and an ornamental seeker that had been handed down through 3 generations of our family, but he chose the smallest weapon in his arsenal, a triangular dagger with a wooden handle and silver blade, known as a parazonium, to end each of the baby's lives. A ruby jewel of considerable value lay at the centre of the quillion, its liquid blush ready to reflect the blood that spilled from the bodies of the children. A man of duty, he did not hesitate as he marched from door to door, searching each house for hidden nurslings before plunging his knife into the heart of every boy he found. And while mothers screamed in horror and rained curses down upon his head, fathers stood silently in corners, mute and impotent, knowing that if they dared to speak, the blade would surely find its way across their throats before their sentence came to an end. Older siblings trembled in fear as they watched Marinus go about his dark business, soiling themselves, frightened that they too were about to face the judgment of the gods for some unspecified crime. But no, once the babe had been dispatched from this world for the next, my father barely glanced in their direction before making his way to the next house, and the next after that, for there were more babies to discover, and more lives to bring to a premature end. After each murder, he wiped the blade clean on his tunic, the fabric growing increasingly discoloured as the sun began to peep over the horizon in the east, a fiery witness to unspeakable crimes, and soon the grey disappeared beneath an incarnadine coat. Of course, Marinus was not the only man engaged in sanguineous misadventures that night. More than 30 other soldiers had been deployed by King Herod to the towns that surrounded Bethlehem, from Ramat Rachel in the north to Raphidah in the south, and from Har Gilo in the west to Uhazim in the east, until more than 300 infant boys were put to death for the crime of being a potential king of the Jews. When my father returned home in the early morning, his spirit dyed with a barbaric tint that could never be erased. I was suckling at my mother's breast, and he placed a trembling hand upon my skull, resting it there for a moment as he gave me his blessing and begged forgiveness from the immortals atop Mount Olympus. When he took it away, a trace of blood was left in its wake, a deadly deposit, and I've always wondered whether some residue of his crimes remained indelibly upon my soul, a tattoo invisible to all but the eyes of the gods, a reminder of the massacre of the innocents that was taking place as I filled my lungs with air for the first time. There is, of course, an unhappy irony to the fact that he dispatched a dozen babies from this world, for he would be responsible for bringing the same number into it over the course of his life, although few would survive past their infant years. He also saw off 4 wives, although none, I hasten to add, at his own hand. And while my mother, Floriana, was the last woman to marry him, she would not be the last to share either his bed or his home. Marinus's first marriage took place when he was only 12 years old, a forced contract with his cousin Iunia, the ritual taking place in a stone temple in the town of Zat-Tara, where they were both born. The marriage was not a success. His father and uncle, greedy men with cruel dispositions, spent their lives slipping between periods of hostility and camaraderie, and their children paid the price for their inconstancy. The couple being so young, It was said that all 4 parents stood on either side of the wedding bed on the night of the ceremony, issuing crude instructions to their naked, frightened offspring on how to achieve consummation. And when Eunia fainted in distress and Marinus burst into tears, they were soundly beaten and informed that they would not be permitted to leave the marriage chamber until the act had been completed to everyone's satisfaction. Eunia died less than a year later, giving birth to a son, my brother, Junius, her fragile young body so ill-prepared for motherhood that it was torn apart by the trauma of childbirth. Although saddened, my father must have grown accustomed to the pleasures of matrimony, for he took a second wife almost immediately, a servant girl named Livia, who gave him a half-dozen more children, most of whom survived only a few months at most, before she was caught in a rainstorm, succumbed to a fever, and died of it within a week. And then there was a third wife, Capella, who tumbled into a well while under the influence of wine, and was discovered months later, her body already in an advanced state of decomposition. And a fourth, Reza, who was found hanging from a rope, a victim of her own malaise. Marinus had been fond of his wives, and was, by all accounts, a more considerate husband than many in Bethlehem, never raising a hand to any of them in anger, but he had never truly loved them. That emotion was reserved until shortly after his 22nd birthday, when he laid eyes on my mother for the first time. And although he would not remain faithful to her, monogamy being an unnatural concept to him, I believe that he felt a deeper emotion towards his 5th wife than he had towards any of her predecessors. My father loved women, all women, and was as indiscriminate with his favours as a dog in heat. He said that tall women excited him, but short women were good for his soul. Thin women made him joyful, but fat women made him giddy. He himself was a magnificent beast of a man, tall and broad, with virile good looks, powerful chest muscles, and a set of golden curls that fell to his neck, capturing the sunlight and adding a reflective glint to the deep sapphire eyes that drew his conquests in, hypnotizing them and fooling them into believing that there was poetry hidden behind his beauty. His only blemish was a horizontal scar across his left cheek, the result of a childhood argument with another boy. But this imperfection only enhanced his splendor, for without it women said he would have been so exquisite that he could scarcely have been called a man at all. Skilled in the ways of seduction, he rarely faced opposition to his desires, taking whoever he wanted, whenever he wanted, regardless of class, age, or marital status. Indeed, Marinus was as likely to be found in a virgin's bed as her grandmother's, and on the rare occasions when his advances were rebuffed, he assumed the woman suffered from a disorder of the mind, and took her anyway, for he recognized no one's rights but his own, and those of his peers within the Roman legion. He was a brute, certainly, but people adored his company, and I, like them, was desperate for him to love me, to show some added favor towards me as his son. This was a battle that I would never win. When Marinus and Floriana first met, my mother was promised to another man, and only a week from her wedding. She was not in love, of course, but a woman who felt any emotion other than gratitude towards the man who had chosen her would have been regarded as an eccentric. The marriage had been brokered by her father, Nivius of Bethlehem, who accompanied her to the marketplace that morning to negotiate with one of the street vendors over the price of his raisins. While the men haggled, Floriana slipped away, making her way towards one of the textile stalls, where she ran her hand along some Dakai cloth that the trader claimed had been imported from the kingdom of Vanga at great expense. "Very beautiful," he assured her, placing his hands together as if in prayer to convince her of his honesty. "In that distant place, women make their dresses from these fabrics, and their husbands fill their bellies with many babies." It was while Floriana was inspecting the man's wares that my father emerged from the doorway of a nearby house and caught sight of her for the first time. He'd spent the morning in bed with the wife of a local tax collector, ravaging her 3 times in quick succession as payback for the percentage of his wages that he was forced to return to the imperial purse.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?